Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an annual pleasure. I wish it were more often, actually, to talk to Jonathan Kellerman, who is home residing in his beautiful room, which I'm happy to say I've been able to visit. It's a gorgeous house, has some really cool cars parked outside.
Thank you.
Right, lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
And we're here to talk about unnatural history. And John, since you're the only person with an actual book, could you hold it up so we can all admire it? There it
There we
is.
go.
Hooray. So this is, I think, the 29th,
30.
39th Alex Delaware novel, which has been a work in progress since, did you say 1985, John?
Yeah.
So clearly, if not the longest running, certainly among the longest running crime series by a still living author,
So far.
which is a really good thing. So let me just, because I had to read this as a printout of a manuscript, I got an actual biography of John, so I'm going to call from it slightly. But let me start by just showing you this awesome list of all of the books that John has written. The Delawares are at the top. I know you can't read it, but you can just kind of see the real estate here.
Brings back memories.
Right. And he and Jesse, his son, together have written 6 so far, and one is scheduled so far for August of this year.
It's actually a year from summer.
Oh, so it's now 2024?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I'll only get to talk to John on Zoom with you once this year. Bummer.
You can talk anytime. We don't need a book to talk.
No, we absolutely do not. But he's written numerous other novels, graphic novels, novels with his wife, Faye, etc. So Jonathan Kellerman is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 52, according to this, crime novels. And in addition to Alex Delaware, The Butcher's Theater, Billy Strait, The Conspiracy Club, Twisted, True Detectives, and The Murderer's Daughter, which I might say is a book I really liked. I wish that I'd seen more of it. With his wife, best-selling novelist Faye Kellerman, he co-authored Double Homicide and Capital Crime. And then we've mentioned he and Jesse together have written 6 novels so far, one to come in August of 2024. He's also written about his amazing guitar collection, which has an entire house of its own at John's house. Oh, God, I mean, it is magical to visit John's guitars. He's won the Goldman, Edgar, and Anthony Awards and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Psychological Association, because let's not forget that before John started writing books, he was, and to some degree, I guess, remains a practicing psychologist. And he's been nominated for a Seamus Award. I don't know why they tucked that in at the end, for heaven's sake. Why didn't they pick that up? She goes for Best Private Eye Novel.
No, you know what happened with that Seamus? They nominated me and I was supposed to win, actually. And then someone said Delaware is not a private eye. So they disqualified me mid-contest.
You're kidding.
Nope.
That's not really true, because I thought it extended past private eyes to people like Alex, who in a private capacity investigate and work with law enforcement.
Maybe in those days they were stricter. I mean, what are you going to do?
Not much, I guess. Although interesting.
Hasn't changed my life. Hasn't changed my life a whit.
Stripped from an award before actually winning it.
I'm kind of used to that, actually, because when I was in middle school, we had a thing called a Bible contest.
Yeah.
And I won. I was like 11, 12 years old, and I won. I went to national, and then I entered the following year, and then parents started to complain that I kept winning, so they disqualified me and passed a post facto law saying you couldn't enter once you'd won. So I'm used to this. This has happened to me before.
I love it. All right, so when we're going to talk about unnatural history, one of the first things I will mention, and we'll come back to it, is that Los Angeles is always a character in John's novels. And in this one, he has a particularly interesting section, I think, about Culver City, which we'll get to. But I want to approach this in sort of more in a different order. Every really great crime novel needs a great villain. But in this one, we have a particularly elusive villain, a villain that I don't think we ever really get to grips with, John. Did you do that on purpose? I mean, that's the character of Victor Clement, is that nobody actually, is it Victor or Vincent? Sorry.
Well, he's not really the bad guy. It's another guy. It's another guy I don't want to name, because, I'm one of those guys. there are many ways to write a crime novel, and some novels, like by my good friend John Camp, known as John Sanford, I think he's great, and he's able to write those books where you know who the bad guy is and still full of suspense. I write a whodunit, and I
Right.
really don't want people to know until the end. And so far, no one's been able to guess, and I try to play fair. So
No, I think you do. But the reason I brought him up was that he's most of the time you do kind of know he's not necessarily the villain, but everything stems from him and his life
for
choices.
sure.
And he remains this elusive and unknowable figure. And I thought it was interesting that you did that, because a lot of the time we do actually finally get to know who somebody is.
But he's really kind of, I hate to use the term of red herring. He's really, we think he's the thing because he has spawned this bizarre family. And most of my books are based on family psychopathology due to my background as a psychologist.
Right.
This book kind of veers away from it. I like surprises. So I like to surprise myself. And if I'm surprising myself, I'm surprising my readers. So
Why are you surprised?
that's why I don't like to talk about the books too much, because they're just let people discover that. Basically.
Well, I just like to say that I'm a seasoned mystery reader, and I was surprised when I got to the end, and surprised in a way that I'm not usually surprised. So.
That's the from you. That is the ultimate compliment.
Well,
if I can surprise you, I'm a happy camper.
You really did. For a variety of reasons, which we can't actually discuss, as you. But let's talk about instead, because we can talk about the victim. Sorry if we name the actual.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's dead right there at the very beginning.
Exactly.
And another hallmark of a really great mystery is that we should mourn the victim. Too often victims are kind of straw men, or they turn out to really ask for it or something. Our victim here is Adonis Clement, and I think his name is important.
Right. He's a sad character. In the sense that he really has good intentions, and yet it catches up with him. I don't want to talk too much about it, but he comes from this strange family. He's got a strange father. He's got a strange mother, and she called him Adonis. He is indeed very handsome and a very sweet guy. And what he embarks in, he's a photographer. He embarks on a project which he takes homeless people and gets them to talk about their aspirations. Let's say one wants to be a doctor, one wants to be a pilot, and he gets to dress them up and photograph them in these aspirational type of costumes. Now, the question is, we won't resolve. Is he doing this just to exploit them, or does he really care about them, or somewhere in between? But it's dangerous territory. And the homeless situation, as we know, is a big crisis. I'm going to sound extremely arrogant, but I predicted the homeless crisis in 1972. In 1972, I was a first-year grad student or second-year grad PhD clinical psych student, and that was the year that they closed down the mental hospitals. And it was an interesting situation. It started with people like, there's a Scottish psychiatrist named R.D. Laing, who promulgated this nonsense that mentally ill people were really superior to everyone. So then they were noble. And then the radical left came in and they said that all psychiatric patients are political prisoners. I mean, you remember the 60s and 70s. And then the fiscal conservatives got involved and said, okay, great, it's expensive to keep these hospitals going. Let's close them down. So the whole notion of wholesale closing down mental hospitals, it was helped along by the fact that some of them were terrible places and snake pits, but some of them were not. And in fact, we had a hospital here at Camarillo where the parents were weeping and begging the state not to close the hospital because they had no way to care for their mentally ill and mentally retarded, mentally challenged patients. It was very, very sad. And the theory was that we're going to substitute for inpatient with outpatient mental health. In other words, little centers around the neighborhood where mentally ill people would come to get their meds and get therapy. And I, being a young, naive grad student, said, But wait a second, a lot of these people are suffering from a disease which they can't be compliant. They won't show up. It's not like arthritis. It's a disease that affects the brain. Of course, there are people who denied in those days that it even existed. They're all political prisoners, which is nonsense. And I said, those people are going to end up on the street. And that was 1972. I've subsequently written a column about it for the Wall Street Journal. And the only people I got flack from were bureaucrats from the outpatient mental health system. But I think we can see what happened. Now, what's happened is what they call a narrative. Now, you notice that writers have narratives, and narratives are usually fiction. That word has now been adapted by everybody. I have a narrative, because we've lost the line between reality and fantasy, lies and truth. And so the narrative about homeless people, it's occasionally true, has been homeless guy, just a regular guy who falls on some bad luck and loses his job and is all of a sudden out on the street. And therefore, the solution is just to help him along, help him get a better job, and get him a place to live. And that's still the narrative among most socially active people and politicians. But that's not true. That's true in a minority of cases. Most of the homeless people are either severely mentally ill, usually schizophrenic, or drug addicted, or both. And these are people who are incapable of living independently. And just providing housing to them is not going to do it. They need care. And then, of course, you get into the whole civil libertarian thing. Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, has started to say, let's increase involuntary holds and put more people in mental hospitals. And the flack he's getting from activists, the activists don't really care. They have a cause. Unlike me, they never saw these people. They never treated these people. I have a friend who's also a well-known writer whose father was severely mentally ill, to the point of being almost homicidal and dangerous. And every time this fellow tried to commit his dad, some lawyer from legal aid would show up who'd never met his dad and fight him. So that's what's happened. Now, I don't like to write a message book, nor am I going to write about that. But I felt, let me at least deal with the homeless in a realistic way. The book's not really only about the homeless, but it certainly features the homeless, and it features the changes in our society that happens when we abandon people, leave them on the streets to fend for themselves when they're in. It's the same thing as leaving children out by themselves. Some people are just not capable of living independently. So
Well, I can't disagree with you. It was a huge problem here. This is the day after the Super Bowl. And Phoenix has a very large homeless camp.
sure.
And with an anticipation of like 150,000 visitors, in other words, new people clogging up the city, the question became what to do, because it was going to be dangerous. It was going to be dangerous for the homeless people to be overrun. It was going to be possibly dangerous for the people visiting. And, you live in Southern California, which has a climate that is benign enough.
That's the reason.
Can actually live outdoors. We live in a climate that's maybe 6 months of the year benign enough. And in the summer, virtually impossible for people to fend for themselves outdoors.
Of course. And we have a huge problem because of weather. People keep flocking. And if we build more housing, it's not going to last. These people are not capable of living in housing unsupervised. And there's just have more people come. If you're giving stuff away for free, people will come. I have compassion. I think the people who deal with this on a socio-political level don't have compassion. They're talking about issues rather than people. As a clinician, I used to be a clinician. I know what it's like. I know how these people live, and they're suffering, and they're victimized, and sometimes they victimize others. Yeah. So I don't want to turn this into a screed, but it is something I predicted the homeless crisis in 1972.
Well, I think that what you've had to say provides the background for the fact that this young man known as Donnie, not Adonis, which is his given name, is naive enough to think that he can do this project, this photography project, this wish aspirational project, without endangering himself or creating problems for the people that he's inviting in. He comes from staggering wealth. We didn't mention that Victor Clement, the serial marrying father and serial procreating um, is one of is another of these enormous and elusive billionaires. And I have to say, Jen, that the the elusive billionaire, or not elusive, but power hungry billionaire, whatever you want to call it, in your case, elusive, has really become a feature of a great many crime novels recently. I'm serious.
Yeah.
The Glass Onion, the movie, is
Sure.
clearly Elon Musk. There's a book by Sean Doolittle coming out, which is in many ways a replica of
Sure.
The Glass Onion, again, Elon Musk. And basically what it's saying is that people with that kind of money, I mean, it's true that the rich are really different, but people with that kind of money are really, really different. And so any sort of normal societal constraints, or
Yeah.
protocols or anything don't mean anything to them.
But it's not just true of billionaires. Or I mean, I think the corporate billionaire is a very easy target. And you notice that Victor defies stereotypes. I
Right.
work really hard to avoid cliches. I don't want to write about Elon Musk. I don't want to write a Romana Clay. That's a lot of bullshit. I want to make stuff up and create interesting characters. And one thing that I notice is, with the exception of some, even villains, I always develop a compassion for them as I'm writing about them. I always see their humanity.
Yeah.
Be it the bad guy, I always see something human in there. So they're not cardboard cutouts. They're real people, be they murderers, victims, in between, relatives. Because I'm interested in people. And as I write the book, these people start talking to me. And I say, guess what I learned about him? Guess what I learned about her? So I think I try to avoid the cliche. I think the corporate billionaire is an easy target, but it's not just billionaires and Elon Musk, guys like that. No, and frankly, if Elon Musk was a left winger, nobody would be doing this, but he's a right winger. It's athletes, it's actors, it's movie stars, it's celebrities. When Beyonce had her baby at Lenox Hill, it kicked a whole bunch of other people off the maternity ward. It's anytime somebody's kowtowing to you because they want a piece of your fame, or they want to be able to say, I knew that famous person. So, fame could be malignant. I think you're not judged by how you treat the people above you. You're really judged by how you treat the people below you. And I try to look at everybody as a human being. If I'm in a restaurant, someone's serving me food, I say, please, I say, thank you. I try to talk to them, because they're not robots, they're people. I'm not saying I'm such a perfect guy. I'm sure I make mistakes, but to me, I look at the person who's serving me food the same way I look at the president. I'm just not impressed by any of that. I want to look at humanity in everybody. And that's what I try to do in my books. And that's what I try to do here, even with the homeless. I just gave you a screed on how I felt about it, but that doesn't mean when I'm portraying a homeless person, I don't portray them with sympathy, with humanity, and some are intelligent and some are not. All kinds of people. They are unfortunate. They have an unfortunate situation. I don't believe in ancillary characters. I don't believe in minor characters. I don't believe in it. Every time you're going to put a person in that book, even if they only appear for a paragraph, my philosophy is they have to matter. It can be a parking attendant. I do not throw people away. And it's the way I've written books for 40 years. And I think people appreciate it. There's a humanism there that they really, really appreciate. So that's what I try to do in all the books, certainly in this book. And you asked why I created this. I really never know what I'm doing. A book's a year-long process. Half of that year is spent planning it. I think I've talked to you about this before. Half of that year is planning and thinking and outlining. By the time you sit down, kind of think you know what you're doing. Of course you don't, because you changed a lot. And that's what have we ever talked about the right brain and left brain aspect of writing novels? Am I
Not
going?
very much. Go ahead.
Okay, so there's a whole concept of left brain and right brain. The guy who developed the concept, Robert Ornstein, who was the psychologist at Stanford, really regrets creating it because it's bullshit. Okay, that's not the way it works. There's not like I'm a left brain person, you're a right brain. There's two hemispheres of our brain. They're theoretically independent of one another, except for a little bunch of nerve fibers connecting them called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is a little bridge. And so there's interplay constantly. If you cut that, you end up with a person with two separate brains, where the right literally doesn't know what the left is doing. But this whole notion of I'm a left brain person, I'm right brain. So writing novels is the best job in the world because it involves stereotypic left brain stuff, which is, and now I'm left-handed, so I could be anything. I mean, my things could be reversed. Left-handed could be left-right, they could be right-left, they could be mixed, I don't know. But a standard right-handed person, which is 91% of the population, you think of the left brain as the more rational thing. So writing a novel, grammar, spelling, structure, organization, typical left brain mathematical, organizational, right brain stuff, creativity, intuitive, making stuff up, fiction. So this wonderful job that I've been so privileged to have combines both constantly. And that's what I find. I have an outline where I think I've been so organized and I know where I'm going. And I've written a lot of books. And then once I sit down, it's totally different. It takes over. It has its own thing. And most people who outline, not every writer does, but those who do, whom I've spoken to, say the same thing. You finish the book, and you look at your outline, it's a different book. So that's what's so wonderful. There's a voyage of discovery.
Right.
And if you're discovering, then your readers are going to discover. And I'm at a point in my life where I don't really care about doing anything but writing the best book possible. That's all I'm in. The money, I have enough money, all that stuff. I want to write the best book possible so it meets my standards. Hopefully, if it meets my standards, other people will appreciate it. And they won't, because if you write a series and you write a lot of books, there's always a danger of phoning it in. So I work very hard, given the confines of the Alex Delaware series, to make every book stand on its own, and each one being a little different. So that's the challenge. Whether I pull it off is not up to me. It's up to other people to say, but that's what I try to do.
Well, and you do. And everybody, after all, reads a book differently. So, every
Yeah.
single person who reads the book brings their own left, right brain and the whole
100%.
do it. So it's different. What I was trying to get to with Donnie is that because his father is fabulously wealthy, Donnie, who has some challenges of his own, does live in a kind of bubble, because he has enough money to, he's not arrogant, he's not, trying to, but he's naive because he hasn't really ever had to face true hardship or whatever.
100%. Beautifully put. He's naive.
Yeah, no, he is. And, he really is a sweetheart. There's a very moving thing after he's dead when somebody very close to him talks about what kind of a person he was. And it's just, makes you weep that we've lost him, because he was in his own way trying to do a really good thing. But because he's naive, he ventured into this territory that John was earlier talking about, where giving people and ask for a bit of hope about maybe their life could be different, or they sort of touch wealth and see that life could be different, could be really dangerous, or it could have nothing whatsoever to do with what happened today.
Exactly.
Exactly. But I really minded that he died.
Thank you. Anyway, it was sad, but somebody's in a crime novel, mostly people die.
They do. And I do think that you gave him a really wonderful love interest. I won't go into it much, but she is an amazing character too. And I wonder, she fights against so many kind of Hollywood stereotypes and so forth. Was she somebody you expected to be who she is, or did she develop as you wrote her?
They always develop on their own. They develop on their own. I don't even plan it. I have the characters, but I never know how they're going to develop. He also has this assistant who has a mad crush on him. And one of the things I do in this book, well, I shouldn't give it away. I'm not going to give it away. No. But I try to show Delaware in a different light than just helping to solve crimes. He's still a psychologist, Delaware. He's still juggling two worlds. He's juggling his professional work as mostly doing child custody work, and then called in to help Milo with cases. But in this book, let's just say at the outset, we see him in a different light.
Yeah, actually, I thought the whole exercise that he once goes through in the opening pages of calming somebody down spoke, right from the core of your professional
Yeah.
expertise. And I don't know, my overall sense of the book was that he was more psychologist than detective.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, obviously, what is his actual role? Is he just a friend of Milo, or is he some kind of consultant to the
He
LAPD?
is non-official consultant. What happened is in the first book, when I was writing When the Bow Breaks, I wrote it in 81. It wasn't published till 85. I had written several novels that didn't get published. Finally, dummy here figured, write what you know. I'd been a psychologist for several years in practice, and I was a medical school professor, and I ran a program for 3,000 kids with cancer at a hospital. So I had a lot of experience. Of course, I'd never, ever write about a patient, ever. And so I bent over backwards not to do that, which made me a better writer because you make stuff up. But I decided I had been involved in some pretty nasty child abuse cases as a consultant. And I thought I could integrate some of that into this plot. But I don't like amateur detective novels. I like Philo Vance. I mean, I just don't like this nonsense where the amateur comes up and shows up the dumb cops. It doesn't work that way. So I said, okay, I have to have a cop. I have to have a cop. And it's LA, so he has to be a homicide cop. And I said, well, let me make him gay, because I was doing everything to fight cliches. I felt books, crime novels were so cliche written. So, for example, I have Alex and Robin, his lover, his girlfriend. I said, I'm going to create a couple where the male deals with human feelings and emotion, and the female deals with power tools. So from the outset, she builds guitars, she has saws, she has beds. From the outset, there was an attempt to really do it differently. So what happens was Alex and Milo become friends in this case. And it's an evolving relationship because Milo happens to be the cop on this case that Alex gets involved in. And then they develop this relationship, this straight man and a gay man. And I did an interview with a writer who's a gay writer, and he's talking about, and he's a young guy, he was talking about the fact that Milo is still his favorite gay character ever. And he's a young guy. I mean, he probably wasn't even alive when the books were started, but he quotes in this interview the original book where Alex is coming to grip. He's slightly homophobic. He's a little uncomfortable with it. So it's an evolving process, and they develop. So they become friends, and Milo sees this guy's a genius. The thing about Delaware, he's in a sense a Sherlockian character. What sets him apart is not profiling, which again is a lot of nonsense. It is his powers of observation, his ability to see things in detail, not in the gimmicky way you see in Sherlock Holmes of he tells you what cigar you smoke, but on a psychological level of looking at people, looking at behavior without necessarily analyzing them. So they become friends, and after a while, Milo keeps calling him in. The department in one of the books, I forget, offers him a consultant job. They want to hire him because he's really helpful, and he turns the police chief down for two reasons. First of all, it's too confining. He doesn't want to be an employee of LAPD. He wants to be an independent guy. Second of all, the money sucks. So he's making a lot of money doing custody evaluations. I mean, custody evaluations now, they're getting $40,000, $50,000 to $200,000 in evaluation in the high end. So he makes enough money doing evaluations and other forensic work, which I did too. So I know I've been in court many, many times as an expert witness. So he makes enough money doing that part-time that he can basically donate his services to his best friend. And there's always jokes about Milo saying, I'll send the bill in, but it's going to take forever to pay and they won't pay, and he doesn't really care. So it's just his way of dealing with it, with this nasty world that provides a little bit of balance to his conventional money-making, life-sustaining, normal job as a psychologist.
Well, that's very true. But, you also then solve a problem, which is that somebody
Right.
who's not actually paid to be in law enforcement, how does he have enough leisure time? And how does he, have enough money where he can donate his leisure time?
And he's a guy who lives well, but he doesn't live in a crazy way. You know, he and his girlfriend have a nice house. She makes a good income. He bought the house years ago. I also mentioned in that first novel, he made some investments. So he's a fairly well-heeled guy. And he lives nicely, but he still drives the same car that he's got a third engine in it because he's a very loyal person. He's not out like me buying a bunch of cars, So he can easily support his lifestyle with consulting work, and that frees him up to do the other stuff. And
It does. In many of the Golden Age detective novels, we found clerical sleuths. They could be rabbis, they could
yeah,
be priests.
sure.
And in part, that solved this problem we were just talking about, that these were people who had a place to live and a salary and enough free time where they could, go off. It's sort of Lord Peter Wimsey. I mean, the same thing, very, very much so. But it also means that Robin, who's a luthier, we talked earlier about John's guitar collection. She's successful at it, but she doesn't really have to be successful at it.
They're
So
a successful couple.
she can indulge herself. You have a really nice scene in the book where she's acquired some amazing seasoned wood from somebody, and she's deciding how to use it. And in fact, I'm going to digress for a moment before I come back, because there's at least one other place where John's own personal stuff comes into play.
You're exposing me.
I am. Aside from food trucks, where is the bit about the fish? I know I
the koi?
Because John has this wonderful koi pond in one of his properties, and you gave us a chance to visit the koi pond in this book, or a koi pond anyway.
Yeah, we've had I had the fish before I wrote the books. I've always loved fish and animals. Faye and I are big animal people. We raised four kids. Our fifth child, who doesn't talk back, is our dog. And we have koi, we have a turtle pond, we have birds. We just love animals. And especially during COVID, we found it very comforting. So I've had some of these koi for 40 years.
They're gorgeous, but I love seeing them in the
We
book.
coddle them. And we have a saltwater aquarium too. So we have a lot of animals. One dog only, but there have been times in our life when we have three, which was a little crazy.
It is a little crazy. We currently have three. Two of them are siblings, and quite young. I took Scooter to his first ever book event a week ago, Monday night. James Rollins is, a veterinarian as well as a thriller writer. And he said to me, he really didn't care if Scooter misbehaved because, like messy stuff with dogs. And I have to say, my puppy was incredibly good. But
I'll tell you, when we did it, it was 92. We had just moved into this house. We had a new baby, and we were foolish enough to buy a third dog. And we had the most strange mix of dogs. We had a Papillon who weighed 7 pounds. We had a French Bulldog who weighed about 27. And then we had a 150-pound Cane Corso, which is a Sicilian Mastiff. Because I just thought, God, it'd be great to have a huge dog. And her name was Donna. She looked like the biggest blue and gold Rottweiler you've ever seen. She's a Sicilian Mastiff. They call them Cane Corsos for some reason, which is so stupid. It's Cane. It's Latin,
right.
Cane Corso.
Right.
But it just grits my teeth when people say Cane Corso because it's C-A-N-E. But anyway, she only lived nine years and she died in my arms. It was a very traumatic event for me. So I decided to just keep it at one dog at this point.
Big dogs don't live as long as small
dogs. She died in my arms. She waited for me, and she looked me in the eye, took 3 gasps, and died. She waited for me to be there. She had congestive heart failure for a couple of weeks. And she's a sweet, sweet dog, but very protective. They're very, very protective dogs. And people would say, "Can I pet her?" I said, "No, you can't." But we had teenage girls at that point.
Yeah.
So it was really great because the boys would come over and Donna would be sitting in the entry hall and the boys would come in and she'd go, So I knew that everything was going to be fine.
I love it. I'm trying to find, there was one other thing that I thought that I had marked, but anyway, at some point, somewhere in this book, John touches on a thing in my life, which I was so surprised. One of the characters, for some reason or other, either comes from or is in Ames, Iowa.
Who knows what?
Right. And I read it because I went blink. My father grew up in
Oh,
Ames,
really?
Iowa. He was
Wow.
the captain of the football team.
Wow.
And I thought, I don't ever think I seen Ames, Iowa featured in a
Well,
book.
I'm very fond of the Midwest.
Okay.
The Midwest gave me my wife,
Aha.
and I really respect people from the Midwest. My mother-in-law is from the Midwest. Faye's grandfather fought for America in World War One.
Wow.
They're from St. Louis, Missouri. And so I really think there's a tendency on the part of writers and movie makers to just disparage the whole center of the country as if it's nothing but coasts. And I just always want to feature all parts of the country. And even though I'm an LA writer, which is by luck because I grew up here, I moved here when I was 9. Uh, and I don't think it's a coincidence some of the best crime novels have been set here because Southern California is a third world nation full of tension. I've always talking about the disparities between the haves and the have-nots. So, and also I think what's really changed about LA, when we moved in 59, there was a film business, but it wasn't a company town. Aerospace was really big. There were all kinds of ways you could make a living. My dad was in aerospace. There were a lot of engineers and really rock solid people. Now LA is totally entertainment. I mean, it's just a company town. And you're talking about businesses that truck in fantasy. So, I mean, come on, that's really ripe for all kinds of bad things happening.
Very
So,
true. Although I guess the Mouse House in Florida is in trouble.
well,
in some
yeah, I mean,
respects.
but they're just an extension of LA.
Oh, they are. You know what? When I was a freshman at Stanford, we
Yeah,
played, was it UCLA or SoCal? I can't remember, a football game.
yeah,
So, little freshmen, we all trundled down there because it was an exciting and wonderful
yeah,
thing to do.
yeah,
And guess what? We went to Anaheim when it was all orange groves and no concrete.
exactly.
And we went to Disneyland when it was essentially brand new.
Yeah,
And
Knott's
people were
Berry
still
Farm was
wondering,
there. Yeah,
yeah, and people were still wondering, it was a little crazy. Would it even survive? So I'm fascinated to see how
yeah.
it's becoming, the mouse has become king of an empire all over.
Well,
Which,
but this whole thing about the film business dominating the city, Elmer Leonard, Dutch was a great writer. I loved him. And, Get Shorty.
no,
You're familiar with that book, but the premise of that book, if you have this guy Chili, who's a bone breaker for the mob in Florida, he beats people up for a living. He's a bad guy, right? And he comes out to LA and he's absolutely horrified by the terrible people he meets in the film business. And I think that was Dutch's way because for a long time his books didn't make any money, and he made his money writing screenplays. And I think he would just wanted to talk about all those people. Not to say everyone in the film business is a bad person, but there's so much lying and cheating and entitlement, and it's something I've never wanted to be a part of, ever. Even when I won the Goldwyn Award, I wanted to write books. I have no interest in writing for film or doing any of that. So, you know how we ended up in LA, my family and I? It was very sad. My dad was a World War II hero. He was in Battle of Bulge, D-Day Normandy, came back to New York. My mom grew up in the slums of the Lower East Side. Here's my mom, who just passed at nearly 103, who was a 4-pound preemie baby who they stuck in a dresser drawer for an incubator. People were tough in those days. Anyway, my dad comes home and there's no housing. The GI Bill just wasn't working. So my parents were in a series of slums, 1-room slums. My mom said in some of them you could put a bottle and it would roll down. And I was born in 49. I was the oldest. And my mom said I shared a room with them. Then when I was about 2 or 3, we moved to the projects in Long Island City, the Ravenswood Home projects, which are now, I think, considered the 9th most dangerous place in New York City. But in those days, it was a decent place. And finally, my parents, neither of whom had ever lived in a house, bought this tiny little 900 square foot place in Queens, in Bayside, Queens. And my dad was a handy guy. He could build patios and screened-in porches, a tiny little place. It was on a block of identical homes. Like tract homes, and I used to go to the wrong house, and the neighbor would bring me home. Anyway, they condemned it for the Clearview Expressway. So my dad says, "To hell with this, move to California." So that's why we spontaneously, in the middle of the year in January, we moved to LA with no plans and no housing and a budget of $35 a week. And we lived in a motel because nobody would rent to a family with 3 kids. And I remember the motel, the Ranch Hotel on Pico, kind of where Fox Studio is now. It had like a cactus neon sign and a cowboy, and it had a swimming pool, which is awesome. Finally, they got a little apartment, but LA was different in those days.
Yeah,
LA was
no, I knew
quiet.
it was.
It
You know,
was,
when
it
I
was,
came to visit you and drove down Wilshire, I could hardly, I mean, I
yeah,
last saw Wilshire Boulevard in like 1959 or something.
yeah.
I couldn't believe it. It's just a long glass canyon.
LA used to be a place where if you stepped off a curb, a car would stop for you if you're a pedestrian. And we were amazed by that coming from New York City, where they don't do that. Now it's not true. It's
No.
just not true. People are not nice. They will flip you off and they will not, even if you have the right of way. Something happened to the city and made it meaner. I'm not sure what it is.
Well, I worry about Phoenix and Scottsdale. It didn't help. The Super Bowl probably brought even more people in. But, I'm from the Midwest, John. I'm from,
Yeah.
I was born in Winnetka, which is
And
part of Chicago. So
oh, yeah.
suburb. And for a long, long time here in Phoenix and in Scottsdale, huge numbers of people were from the Midwest who came for the winter. They came from Minnesota. They came from Easterners tended to go to Florida. Midwesterners came to Arizona. But, all of that is really changing. And I mean, there were a lot of Midwestern values here. And now I see that it's becoming much more like Southern California. It really is.
There's still a lot of good in Southern California. It's very easy to criticize it, and we talk about that, but there's still a lot of lovely people, and there's still a lot of people are still nice. I'm one of those naive guys who really believes most people are good. I mean, and the research is bearing it out. There's this whole notion that kids were a blank slate, tabula rasa. There's a wonderful thing called Babies on Netflix. Where they do, it's actually based on research, and they show that even little babies at a young age are altruistic. And
That's wonderful.
it's
I love
wonderful
that.
to see. Yeah. I mean,
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to change the subject.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're done. Okay. So there are moments where John's background in psychiatry, psychology really come into play in this book. And one of them is when Milo and Alex are having a conversation about, Donnie had this project with these homeless people. And so are they suspects in his death, whatever? And Milo says, now all I have to do is find 8 homeless people. Excuse me. Unhomed individuals. You're the social scientist. Tell me why people think remaining anything makes a difference. And Alex says, it's easier than finding a real solution.
Yeah.
Just call it something different.
This is a pet peeve of mine. We change things. We just change the names of things as if that's going to make a difference. And it rarely, if ever, does. And it is a way of avoiding, because most things that are effective involve hard work. And so people want to have a magic wand. We'll rename it. It'll be treated differently. So, what's the difference whether you call them unhomed or homeless? What's the difference? What is the difference? They still have a big problem. I'll give you a good example. Psychopath. Psychopath is a term that goes back to a book called The Mask of Sanity, written in the 30s by a psychiatrist named Cleckley. Psychopath. And it's basically, we know what a psychopath, I mean, a lot of people don't, but they're bad people. It's not a mental illness. It's a personality quirk where they don't have empathy and they can be cruel, blah, blah, blah. Then politically, people said, well, society, so let's call them sociopaths. Well, it's the same thing. And yet you'll have ignorant people trying to differentiate psychopath versus sociopath. It's the same thing. We just renamed it. Now the American Psychiatric Association calls them antisocial personality, and we keep renaming it, but it's the same thing. I like psychopath, and I stick with it. And because the guy who knows more about it is a psychologist named Robert Hare, and he calls them psychopaths. So we just rename things. We
do. No, there's no question about it. So Donnie, who aspiration. He's a photographer and
Yeah.
he, aspires to be better known, do good work, the whole bit. Even he has all this money, but somehow maybe 10 years ago, he had sort of a successful show. So he's grasping for some project that he can do that will be significant. And the thing we've mentioned to us is he's decided that he's going to and Alex and Milo stumble upon photographs at the crime scene, which reveal these people who've been dressed up and made up and turned into, and what he calls them, a name typed in capitals had been affixed to the top of each before shot. In other words, the unhomed individual that was brought in for this project. Each after shot was tagged with a single sentence wish summary.
Right.
So part of what Donnie did was to try to figure out what these people would like to be if everything had gone their way. Did they want to be a surgeon? Did they want to be a ballerina? Did they want whatever? And that's, of course, where, he was naive in thinking that there wasn't danger and even unkindness, I think. And
I think his intentions are pure.
They are.
Intentions are pure, but he just is, as you say, he's a babe in the woods to some extent. But this tendency to rename things, I'm going back to these Idaho murders, and I wrote a book called Savage Spawn, which is a nonfiction book about violent kids back in the 90s at the invitation of Random House, a library of contemporary thought. And there's a section in there what I call them schizoid psychopaths. And I use the Unabomber as an example. And it's basically a psychopath because some psychopaths are very charming. They're very charismatic. A lot of politicians, I won't name names, but
yes,
charisma is one of these days I'm going to write a book called Charisma, because charisma is really malignant. Okay. It's very superficial. But they're very charming, and in fact, the more intelligent the psychopath, less likely they are to use violence, because violence is a very ineffective mechanism for getting what you want. But then there's what we used to call schizoids. Schizoids are loners, people who can't relate to other people, and then there's a schizoid psychopath. So it's like the Unabomber. He likes to sit in a cabin by himself and just kill people for the fun of it. And when I heard about these Idaho murders, I'm not going to pontificate about a guy I've never met, but some of what I'm hearing about Komeyer is starting to evoke that in me. A guy who really had trouble relating to people, but is also cruel and callous. Now, maybe he's innocent, I won't say anything, but that's the chord it struck with me. So,
yes,
we'll
no, I felt the same way actually reading about him. The minute that he was actually enrolled in whatever the course he was taking, that's it. This is the guy. So relating to what we were talking about name, when trying to get to grips with one character in the book, you say, when it came to blank, the internet did what it always does when facts are lacking, substituted random guesswork, borderline libel, and paranoid nonsense. And again, I think you are so right that, everybody has a platform now. It used to be that a lot of these people were muzzled or their range was like one other person, but now, and so rather than trying to, the lack of, daily newspapers, the lack of investigative reporting that is edited and responsible, we get all this wacko stuff all the time. But again, it's applying terms.
I beautifully put. I mean, it's led to the degradation of our political dialogue. Mm-hmm. Most people are not extremists. Most people are not extreme. If you speak to most people, and they're kind of close together, even if you look at politics in America in the 80s, Republicans and Democrats, there wasn't that much separating them. Now, because of the internet, as you say, if you wanted to pontificate, you had to take a soapbox and go in the park and scream and yell. Nobody would hear you anyway. Now, every crazy person, every idiot, every psychopath can get on the internet and spout stuff, and 1 million people are going to follow. And the news cycle has changed from 24 hours to 24 seconds. It's all clickbait.
Well,
And
it is clickbait, unfortunately, and I don't care how many algorithms they
yeah,
devise, all of this stuff leaks out all the time. And then you have
absolutely.
somebody like Elon Musk, who we've mentioned again, who thinks, that just letting it all run out there is better for everybody. I won't even
Yeah.
go there.
But
Okay, so
the thing is that because of the clickbait thing, these so-called conventional papers are now imitating that.
yeah.
And so their standards of journalism have fallen too. So it's really pretty sad what's happened.
It really is. And unfortunately, the crazier people get all the attention. Kari
Yeah,
Lake here, Donald Trump in Florida, because they are super clickbait,
yeah.
they keep getting. So let's talk one more example of Alex's training comes in
Yeah.
very early in the book when somebody is having a meltdown. And I really love the way you sort of sum it up. Um, when you say she was ready to wind down. Seriously, Alex, what feels bad about anxiety is loss of control. Anything that restores control can help. So you gave her permission to freak out. I didn't fight it, or order her to relax. Sounds like reverse psych to me. If I'd have tried it, the whole damn thing would probably have gone south. And then you mentioned that an aftermath of an adrenaline OD is that people hit a fatigue wall soon, and that is a good time to question them. But I like the whole sequence that Alex and this woman who has discovered the body and is totally freaking out, how he brings her back in ways that I think that most of us wouldn't think of, that we would have in fact done the wrong thing rather than, tell her to relax.
Right. No
Not what
substitute.
she needed to hear.
No substitute for clinical experience.
Yeah.
I dealt with it for years. What's the worst thing anyone wants to hear when they're tense? Relax. You'll hear the cops do that. 911. Why they do? You need to calm down, sir.
Right.
That's the last thing people want to hear. They're upset for a reason, but we keep doing it to make ourselves feel better because we are not happy when someone else is anxious.
Yeah, no, it's our coping mechanism.
It's like a baby crying. We want the baby to shut up and go to sleep.
Absolutely. But
So
it's our coping mechanism.
exactly. It's all selfish. It's all selfish. It
But I
really
love
annoys me when I hear that someone say, you need to calm down. That's not going to calm somebody.
Well, if for nothing else, if you read this book, it will give you instant instruction on how to deal with somebody having a meltdown.
Yeah, it's
The
true.
final thing, I've said that we would come back and talk about Culver City. And
Yeah.
here's what John has to say. Lots of traffic, the new Culver City. During Prohibition days, the town had been a corrupt oasis for bootleggers, with local cops notifying the criminals in advance of raids. 4 decades later, the town settled in as the sleepy adjunct to the southernmost tip of West LA. Now it was hipster central, housing cruel-looking knife-edge buildings that clogged the business district from Venice Boulevard to Jefferson, home bases for streaming services, software giants, game developers, and the kind of startups that hatch 19-year-old moguls. All that also brought the enterprises that sprouted on islands of youthful affluence, gourmet food trucks, bars pretending to be dives. I love that one.
Yeah.
The latest thing cafes, mandatory nods to organic, vegan, sustainable, and any other trendoid deemed virtuous. And I thought, didn't Raymond Chandler write about Culver City?
He sure did.
And
He sure
it
did.
was, if I remember right, it was indeed that place you first mentioned. And now
100%.
now
Totally
it's
corrupt.
hipster central.
It's changed. I mean, it was so corrupt. Everything that you just read is true. But for years, Culver City was this conservative, blue collar, white collar little bedroom community that nothing ever happened. And then because land was a lot cheaper than in West LA, Google moved there and Apple moved there. They're all there. They've changed it totally. But they get involved in crazy things. For example, we go back to the homeless. They had a lot of homeless people living on the sidewalks in Culver City, right? Blocking the sidewalk so people couldn't walk. So what's their solution? I don't know whether they're actually doing it, but the proposal was to spend a whole lot of money widening the sidewalk, like huge amount of money to widen the sidewalk. Well, need I say more? Yeah.
No, not at all. But you also mentioned the fact that parks that used to be, places where
Yeah.
kids could play and people could
Yeah.
enjoy are now camps, for
Yeah.
the homeless, and that also has changed the city. Let's call Patrick in. He has managed to stay with us here when he should have come into this conversation a long time back. Patrick, I'm sorry. Come and join us, and I'm going to shut up and you take over.
Hi, Patrick.
I take over. I'll just want to talk about guitars, but no. We got some good questions that have come in.
Okay.
Let's see. Pat says, kind of going back to what you were talking about, charisma, and what an interesting, compelling topic that would be. Would that be a possible title of a book for?
It might be. I might have time to do it because I think it's a very negative thing because it's superficial by nature. And it can be used in a very bad way.
Right. Let's see here. There was a question here. Okay, Daniel wants to know, your background is in child psychology, as is Alex. Is Milo's character based upon anyone you have known in the past? As a fan, I should probably know this.
No. Whole cloth. I can't tell you when the books first came out, how many people came out and said, I know who that's based on. I totally, like everyone else, I invent them in my head. I really, because I was a psychologist and I was so restricted by confidentiality, it forced me just to, and first of all, that's the fun of writing fiction. People don't understand that we people who write fiction, I've talked to Dean Koontz about this and Stephen King, we just love making stuff up. So no, he's out of whole cloth.
Let's see. Robin says, tuning in a bit late. The brain is phenomenal and there's still so much to learn.
Yes.
Reading books out of my comfort pleasure zone allows for growth. Has Jonathan mentioned, let's see, which writers were an early inspiration for him?
Oh boy. I mean, I read adult books as a child. So Dumas and all the adventure stuff, and Robert Louis Stevenson and James T. Farrell, who people may not know, who was a writer. He's Studs Lonigan. My parents happened to have one of his books in the house, and they left me alone. And at the age of 9, I discovered and I read stuff that was totally inappropriate. I just thought he was an amazing writer. But I was eclectic. And in terms of crime fiction, I'm very much a fan of Sherlock Holmes in that sense, because I like the use of observation. I do like the hardboiled detectives. I prefer Ross McDonald to Chandler. And a lot of the lesser known guys, I think, Jonathan Latimer, Horace McCoy. I think Chandler's overrated. I think Dashiell Hammett's overrated. It's not my cup of tea, but I love Ross McDonald. Thought he was great. As James Ellroy, and I used to call him Ross the Boss. So he's good. Now, the person I really admire is Ruth Rendell, even though we write nothing alike, but we're both deal with human psychology. And I think she was one of the great writers of the early 21st century.
I like that you mentioned Horace McCoy. He's a
they shoot horses.
Yeah,
all those lesser known guys are great.
Yeah,
Jonathan Latimer, I mean, all those guys are great. David Goodis, all the hard boiled stuff. But Ross, I would say of all of them, Ross McDonald and Margaret Millar to some extent. Really, they were Southern California writers, and they really helped me create my own books.
Wow.
Although interestingly enough, they were Canadian.
Yes, they were Canadian, but they moved to Santa Barbara, which they call Santa Teresa. Yeah, well, I'm originally from New York City. No one's from here, except my kids. They're all California.
Let's see here. Okay, Daniel would like to know. Okay, COVID put a stop to the signing book tours of America's favorite authors. That's true for a while. Now that COVID has finally begun to decline, do you ever see yourself going out on the road again?
I never say never. It actually, for us, it wasn't COVID. It was Jeff Bezos who basically destroyed the book business because it's ebooks, and you can't tour for an ebook. Barbara's the exception. She runs a great bookstore. Most of the bookstores close. There's nowhere to browse. There's nothing to do. And publishers just don't want to spend the money to tour you. I did many, many years of touring. So I think my touring days are probably over, but I never say never.
I keep hoping we'll hook him over here just one more time, maybe with Jesse. That's why I was so
Why
hopeful
not?
it was going to be August.
Well,
You know?
maybe a year from August. We'll see.
Maybe a year from August, because we've had the entire Kellerman family here.
Yeah.
More than once, but we've had Jonathan and Jesse, we've had Jonathan and Faye, but I love Jonathan and Jesse together. They have this wonderful father-son.
Yeah.
Actually, Jonathan and I became friends, I think, partly because we supported Jesse, who's just a wonderful writer.
It could be true. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it is true.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's dealing with 5 children now. So, you know.
And his wife is a doctor, so they actually did know how that happens, John. Come on.
She is a doctor who didn't practice medicine. She's an executive at a healthcare company. She has a new book out. She has a business book out called Tomorrowland, which she wrote. Yeah. She has a book. Another Kellerman wrote. Gabriella Rosen Kellerman, Tomorrowland. Came on January. Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, Karen says, hello from Kansas.
Hello.
Do you and Faye ever help each other when you get in a corner as you write?
Neither of us ever get into a corner. We've never blocked. The one time that was relevant, we did 2 novellas together, two sets of 4 novellas, Capital Crime and Double Homicide. In that sense, we really liked it because, as Faye said, you know, I would do a draft that I didn't have to worry about it. I send it to him via email, and then I'd send it back. So in that sense, but we don't block. I've never had writer's block. And I think the reason I've never had writer's block, neither has Faye to my knowledge, is because I spend so much time planning and plotting. Now, that doesn't mean I don't write crap on various days, but hopefully I rewrite it. My favorite quote about writer's block was Robert Parker, the late great. He said, well, Mr. Parker, what do you think about writer's block? He says, when you call a plumber, does he say, I can't come because I have plumber's block? I love that. So we treat it like a job. And no, and, you know, it's really funny because people would always interview Jesse when he was a kid and say, what was it like with 2 writers? He says, you're under the impression we sit around the table talking about books. We don't. We talk about what all families talk about. We were a very child-oriented family. We focus on the kids. So it was a boringly normal childhood. So Faye and I don't really talk about our books much. We just do our job, you know.
Do you have similar writing habits? I mean, are you in opposite sides of the house? And
Yes,
do you work
yes,
similar
opposite
hours?
sides. Yeah, she has her own office. I have my own office. It's a fairly large house, so it's
You're both
separated by.
morning writers? Or?
I mean, I'm not rigid about it. Back in my failed writer days and during the first 5 bestsellers when I was in practice, I used to write from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. in my garage. But given the choice, I prefer the morning. But once again, if I don't get to it in the morning, I'm a little more free and easy now. I'm not that rigid. But I do prefer the morning because we're fresher, you know.
I think that's about it. But for my own edification,
Yes.
Are you still acquiring any new instruments? I know you
My-
were playing the oud last time.
I do play the oud. My philosophy about I have enough instruments. I'm not a hoarder. I want it to look good. So my philosophy is nothing comes in unless something goes out.
Ooh.
So I did purchase a historically important guitar. I mostly play classical guitar. I read music. I play classical guitar. And I purchased a really nice, historically important one and put another one up for sale because, you know, I don't want it anymore. I'm at the point in my life where I feel like paring down a bit, but I'm too lazy to do it, basically.
Yeah.
I sold a bunch of cars, you know, you just have enough stuff after a while. So, you know, I'm mostly concentrating on playing music rather than acquiring instruments.
I can see what looks like some nice national
Yeah.
resonators over there.
Yeah, it's my collection of naturals there.
Nice.
I have them here because they don't need humidification because they're made out of metal.
Right.
Yes, still do. That was my beautiful wife telling me to come for dinner. So, yeah.
I
There we
think
go.
I think that means we probably have talked long enough, but it's always so much fun, and I never know where conversations with John are
great.
going, which
It's
makes
great.
it even more fun.
It's great to see you. Next time you're in LA, you got to come by.
Well, I'll talk to you about Passover. We've talked about that
Oh,
before. I told you
that'd be
that
great.
once in my life, I think that I and my wonderful Jewish husband should experience Passover. So maybe we'll do that this year.
I think it would be fun.
It would be fun. We'll talk
Okay.
about it. Right. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for watching us. This will become a podcast, and the video here on Facebook and on YouTube will stay up forever. So if you know anyone that has couldn't join us now but would like to watch it, they're certainly welcome to. John has signed copies of the book. Hold up the book. You still got the book? There it is. Our copies should be with us any moment. Actually, I thought
Yes,
they
you
came
said
today.
that.
And they officially go on sale tomorrow. So perhaps that is the day that we will have them. But do grab one before we sell out. Have a happy Valentine's Day,
You
everybody.
too,
You
Barbara.
and your
Thank you.
beautiful wife. And Patrick, yours isn't going to start well, but I hope it ends well.
It's great to see you.
Right.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Good night.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.